It's easy to be impatient or say, I want you to tell me what I need to know. But the thing about PowerShell is it was designed to be people for discoverability. But Jeffrey Snover actually said it when he thinks that's explorability. It was designed to allow you to explore lots of command lists that let you find out what's out there, connect with things. So you need to leverage that and explore. And it's just, I find, no matter how much I learn, I would never call myself a PowerShell expert because there's always so much I don't know. And there's always new things in PowerShell. It's one of the widest, deepest technologies I've ever used. And it just always new things. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I never tried this. The other thing is with PowerShell, as we're doing this, think about what you want to do. What are you interested in doing? Sometimes I show something, and you need to kind of look beyond that. It's like, okay, that's a stupid example, but if I took the same idea and we're using Active Directory or going to AWS even or somewhere else, then it might be really good. And I try doing IC programs. Sometimes I'm really excited. The example is terrible, but I said, wow, so I could create an object with methods and do this. That's something I could use in the general sense. And most of all, have fun. A lot of times people get stressed out. They're learning something new. They put a lot of pressure on themselves. Every time you come up with a little bit more knowledge, you're ahead of the game. So you never lose. You just have fun with it. And one of the problems I had with learning PowerShell is I knew the old DOS shell, and I could get by with a few batch scripts to do things, or I'd use SQL agent in the background, do some tasks, use T-SQL, whatever. But I finally hit a roadblock where I was either going to build a lot of old batch files to do a massage work, because I was using Informatica Cloud to integrate with SQL Server, and it just was very limited in terms of what it could do. So I had to do a lot of massaging, decrypting, encrypting, and stuff with files, and I decided that's the point I'm going to learn PowerShell. But it's easy to get caught up with this thing and never really hunker down and say, I've got to learn this so I can really master it. And deadlines never go away. We've always got them. So my recommendation is give yourself a little extra time on something. Say, yeah, I'll do it. And say it'll be 3 days. Maybe it'll only take 2 or whatever. But try to give yourself a little extra room to do it with PowerShell. And once you do get a little bit of proficiency, your other tasks are going to speed up that much more. And I'm going to show examples of reusability, which is my big thing in life. It's write it once, make it a function or something, and then just reuse it everywhere. And that's what saved me, because in the beginning it took me about 2 weeks to get fairly good with PowerShell. But once I did, I started writing single functions to do things and reuse it, and it was great. PowerShell does take time to become competent with it, because there are unfortunately these little pieces that's 90% looks really easy to use. That 10% is completely unintuitive, and it really frustrates you in the beginning. And the best way to do some PowerShell is not always the best way. So for instance, first time I wanted to write to a file in PowerShell, I thought, well, what does C# do? Create a file system object, open it, do what you want, write to the file, close the connection. You can do that. It took maybe 20 lines of code to do this. You can do it in a single character in PowerShell, a little greater than sign or 2 greater than signs. You're done. Or just the out command with out file command. But it's not obvious at first, especially if you come from some other background and you're used to doing it maybe DOS or something else. So you got to kind of poke around. It's a very Googleable tool. One of the nice things about having the dash in commandlets, since no other language does that, if you Google something like get-content, you'll get tons of PowerShell up immediately. It's harder to do it with language like Python because somebody may have a similar command. Okay, so the PowerShell ecosystem. I did this because looking at Jeff Snover's comment, I stepped back and I realized that as I learned bits and pieces of PowerShell, I was kind of taking little pieces of a much, much bigger ecosystem, a bigger world. And so I categorized what I see as the sort of areas. So you've got a whole bunch of ease of use features, configuration profiles. There's actually 4 different configuration profiles you can set up any given user for a PowerShell. Explorability is a whole bunch of commandlets. Design, not to mention the doc tags and everything else within functions to help you discover, learn, find help. Reusability, really good. So you get the modules, you get functions, you get all this great stuff, and the advanced functions. Then administration, so we've got remoting, all kinds of great features there. Complete job system. How many people have used the PowerShell job system? Okay, so that's a whole thing in the background. You can schedule jobs or just push things into the background like you would in something like cron on Linux. But it's a really nice feature that oftentimes goes unlooked at. Really nice with Azure, because sometimes you create a VM. I'm going to demo this. It'll be my first time trying this in a group, but I'm going to demo creating a VM in the background. So by doing that, I don't have to sit there waiting for that thing to finish. I can do it in the background and come back to it. Providers is when you get something that makes it look like it's a file drive, like a C drive, D drive, but it's not. It's actually SQL Server. So you can say CD tables, CD AdventureWorks. And that's really nice because providers can make it easier to work from a command line and work with a resource. Has anyone worked with the system registry through a provider? Okay, so you've seen that type of thing. All right, again, advanced functions. Anyone know what advanced functions are?
It's like command line binding.
Yep, exactly, command line binding. So you get the command line binding attribute, and do you know what that does though when you use that?
Gives you a lot of stuff.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, it lets you use some of the general parameters like for those.
Yep. And if you look up the common parameters, the command line common parameters, all of those, right? All those become available. And then there's a piece in there, if you put parentheses, support should process, then you'll also get the ability to confirm and what if. And so that allows you to say, what would you do if I actually said format this drive? And you get to see, I would have formatted the drive, do you want me to do it? And confirm just prompts you and says, do you really want me to do this? So those are really nice also. So there's a whole ton of things there. There's, in the area of programming, also object orientation. So there's two parts of object orientation. We talked about earlier, when you pipe things around, unlike Linux or something where it's just text streaming, you're actually getting rich object collections that are streamed around with many properties and methods and all kinds of stuff. And you can create your own objects using PS custom object, which acts like a template. You declare an instance, you can attach properties and methods to it. You've got your own class, basically your own object. 5.0, you've got classes. So 5.0 and above, you can actually say, I'm going to do a class, I can do inheritance, I can do all kinds of exactly like you would in C#. And then, of course, piping, you can actually do the object-based piping, which is really powerful because you can take entire object streams and pipe them into other things. And finally, looking into extensions, and this is where it's really interesting to me because in these areas, you talk about something that PowerShell isn't inherently designed to work with, but it's extended to do that. So very much like we talk about Python, Python gives you a new package or module you can do, something it can talk to SQL Server, it can do any kind of data manipulation or analytics. So the extensions, PowerShell actually can be used for cloud automation with AWS. It can be used for Amazon Cloud, AWS, Google, pretty much anyone. You just get a module, plug it in, and start using it. Anyone know what a workflow is? Okay.
Well, it's like a tree of tasks with dependencies and rules so that it can basically walk through your tree and execute code.
Yeah. So I'm giving stickers out now. That'd be made up actually. It says, it's kind of like the Dunkin' commercial. PowerShell, so PowerShell runs the world. So, be the first kid on your block to have it. No. So yeah, workflows are really cool because it's actually really part of the C# world. And what workflow is designed to do is, first of all, parallel processing. So the idea is it's got this engine, and you can split off tasks and say, run this, run this, run this, and that'll be running, you can run them parallel. Then you can say, I need this, once those dovetail back, run these in sequence. Then go off here, and for each in parallel, you can do a for each in parallel, just spin off a bunch of processes. And you could put these in different machines and things, so you get a lot of flexibility. Nice thing too, suppose you have a job and you can run it and stuff, and at the end, you want to say, shut down my server, I need it to reboot. Workflows have the ability to pick up right after they're done. You can do a sync point, and it will actually save the state. The next time you pick it up, it'll kick the job in and keep going. So it's another feature of workflows. Really good if you're doing something like a database. I can think we've done migrations, you do all the stuff, then you have to stop and restart. Workflows are not part of PowerShell at all. PowerShell implements commandlets that get translated to workflow language. So you don't even have to know workflows or how to use them, you just think PowerShell. And then you can see it go through a little blank, it compiles your language into workflows and then executes. Anyone know runbooks? Okay. So what's a runbook?
So it's, well, are you talking about Azure runbooks?
Azure
Actually,
runbooks.
SMA has runbooks right now. So it's basically just a way of graphically defining a workflow, right?
Well, it depends. It can be graphical. So you check it.
Yeah,
So it can be graphical, but the first flavor of runbooks was workflows with PowerShell. That's what, and I found it really interesting the first time I looked at it because you went in and all you could do was workflows, and it caused a little bit of complexity when you were trying to do runbooks within Azure because you had to understand workflows and they kind of did parallel processing. Now you can do standard PowerShell scripts, which is what we're doing here. But you could do also workflows, and we can do that also. But then there's also the graphical version, which I think translates to PowerShell, but it doesn't let you. Unfortunately, when you do that, you can't turn it into PowerShell code. which is what I would like to do, graphically generate it and then say, give me the code. That'll probably come later though. And anyone know what desired state configuration is? Yep.
A bit.
What's that?
A bit. I've read about it a bit.
Okay, but do you know what it is?
No. I mean, I probably could talk a bit about it, but
It's the configuration control engine for managing state of servers.
Right.
Or applications.
Okay, so I'll give you a second. So what's interesting though is desired state configuration is also something that's not technically part of PowerShell really. It was called Chocolatey, and what it really is it's a declarative model. So one way to do it in PowerShell is to say, query this server. Do you have SQL Server running? Yes, it's stopped. Oh, SQL Server should be running. Start it. So you've got this kind of conditional logic. Is this happening? Do this. Do you have the Windows latest applied update? No, I don't. Update it. Instead, you declare rules. You tell the server, you say, here's my desired state configuration. You should have the latest update of Windows applied. I want these services to be running. I want these services not to be running. I want Bryan not to have any security authorization in my system. You know, all that stuff, and you declare it. And you declare it, and then just say, make it so. So it's like John Luke Picard, make it so, and it happens. So the nice thing is, you get a layer of encapsulation and obfuscation because you don't have to worry about how it does it, which is nice because that means under the covers, you don't have to worry about compatibility. Microsoft makes it work, and you don't have to say, oh, now I'm on Linux or some other environment. If it's implemented, you should be able to just say, what do you require? Okay. So again, all of these things, especially these extensions, work just in PowerShell. You don't have to think about it. It's all integrated. You use PowerShell the way you always did.
One thing on that, Chocolatey is actually still available. It has a slightly different goal in that Chocolatey is kind of designed to be the package manager replacement for Windows. So like you know on Linux you have apt-get and Yum.
Okay.
Like that. So Chocolatey is trying to get there. It's still kind of it's still slightly immature because, as I'm sure everyone here knows that's had to deal with MSIs, it can be very difficult to automate certain things.
Okay.
But there is a community-supported repository out there. They now have a DSC resource, so you can install software via that, and they are soon to be publishing a package management extension, which is kind of the built-in Windows support for multiple different package managers.
Oh, okay, cool.
So,
excellent, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so maybe I got it wrong. I should look up Chocolatey. I thought it had to do with maybe it's not desired state configuration. I know they had something that it was in 4.0 that they were looking to launch, but that's good to know.
Package management was part of, that's exactly what
Okay.
it is.
Yeah.
Package management.
Good. But so the thing too with all this is really the idea though that the ecosystem kind of, as they extend things. So even if I were to say, and in fact, I've talked to people with like AWS, can you do AWS automation? I'm like, well, yeah, because there's a module for it. So sure, I can import it and do the same things I do with Azure, same thing with Google Cloud. So it gives you really nice across the board support. If you know PowerShell, there's almost nothing you can't do in terms of automation. And even DSC is supported on Azure and things. So you can do DSC within Azure. And it's different than in standard PowerShell because you just declare your rules and then make it so, but it's supported within PowerShell, so you don't have to lose your familiar interface and how you're used to doing it. So thanks.
And the nice thing for that, we've used it extensively where I work, and the nice thing about it is it's all PowerShell on the back end, so you basically just write kind of a standard template of PowerShell functions, and then you can define anything you want declaratively through that. So there's a fair bit that you can do, even if it's not something that's already provided in the PowerShell gatherings.
Cool. So you use DSC to supply functions?
We'll use DSC. So there are certain things that we want to define on our servers, and they're not part of something that's already built up.
Oh, okay.
As part of DSC. So we built our own DSC resources.
Cool. Excellent.
And that way it sort of works like Puppet.
Yeah, it's very similar actually.
Yeah.
Puppet, and actually now it supports Linux, so it's kind of growing into that realm. It doesn't have the centralized management that something like Powershell does, but they both support DSC, utilizing DSC resources. And if you have SMA, which is part of the System Center, you can actually kind of manage everything in Azure, and then it will like orchestrate your servers on-prem through that SMA piece. So,
Cool.
So you can kind of do Puppet and Chef-like.
Yeah.
Centralized.
And that's the thing too. There's certain things that are parallel, I think, with PowerShell, like Chef, Puppet, and all these things, and Kubernetes, and all these things that are similar. But I think the nice advantage of PowerShell is kind of the range of what it can do is pretty wide. So, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Was that word you used? Kubernetes?
Kubernetes.
Oh, okay,
Which I think
okay.
is really more Docker, but similar
Okay.
type of idea. Yeah. Let's see. So who can name this thing?
The Partridge Family. Come on, get out. I have it with my dog on
Oh, it's funny. All right. So anyway, so it's funny because this was my first computer. I had to do a mail order thing back then.
Is that a tape? Oh, cool.
So it was a Sinclair ZX80. Had a whopping, I think, 16K of RAM, half of which was eaten up by the OS and the basic interpreter. Nice chiclety template keyboard. I had to save programs by doing press record on the cassette player and transfer programs in, plug into some sort of a CRT, like a regular old TV monitor. And that, I was like, wow, this is state of the art. And everybody thought I was crazy because, like, you can't do anything with this. Nobody wants to use computers. I'm like, someday. So it happened eventually. And even I used to connect to something. Anyone remember CompuServe?
Mhm.
Yeah. So that was the first kind of before the internet. So what I find interesting, though, is that, now look at us. Like, we can just say, I just need a machine. And I can spin it up, a VM, multiple cores, lots of memory, up and down. I don't care. I don't extend it, give me more in like minutes. Sometimes seconds, and you've got all this stuff. And I think back to what I originally started with, it's just a whole new world. Like I was talking to somebody in like an interview, and he's like, yeah, it's like hardware is software now. And I thought that was almost a true statement. A little weird to say it, but it's basically, you can just say, I want this, and boom, the software can declare what it wants. PowerShell can say, I want a VM or something. The most important thing, of course, is automation with PowerShell, so that you can get your droid army working together to take over the world. So what I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit about the Azure architecture at a very high level. And mostly because of what I want to talk about. So I'm going to kind of focus less on the hosted apps and that high level, which I think is really powerful, but it's a little too sophisticated for just trying to present basic automation. And so I'm looking at the first part of it is infrastructure as a service, but the idea is really just really doesn't even have to have an operating system. It's just a box. You say, I need some storage. I need a box. It gives it to you. And then you can bring your own stuff and install what you want on it. Then you've got platform as a service, which is more like a complete VM. And I'm going to look at creating, does anyone know, like SQL Server Developer is actually free. So I found it. I'm like, great. I can now create a VM, but it doesn't charge me for SQL Server by using the SQL Server Developer Edition, which is on the gallery. So I thought that was nice. So I'll show you that. But you can, and another thing I'll show you is a little bit thing I learned, but I found it difficult. If you've used Azure, has anyone found it difficult to figure out how to locate the resources for scripting to sell like SKU and what's what product vendor is and stuff? Because when you do that, I'll show you, but you actually, if you want an image, it's
PowerShell really deep.
yeah, it's a pain. But I've got a few command lists that I figure out how to work through it to figure out the sequence you need so you can say, this is how I get my definition. So we'll talk about that. But this is kind of the overall picture. And the other thing we just also talked about kind of earlier, but Microsoft's open source, even Oracle, I read this, Oracle, which used to be kind of really the war between Microsoft and Oracle, but Oracle is embracing Microsoft saying, yeah, they're our preferred cloud vendor, even though they have a cloud, and they have an agreement. Now, it might seem unimpressive, except Google can't even get Oracle to make an agreement with them. They have nothing. And you'd have to install it on one of the VMs if you do, and then figure out they don't even have a way to sort of price what you should be paying for it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Amazon, AWS does have Oracle as well, so they've apparently got something going. But so we're open source. I don't know if you've looked, but you can do any kind of Python. You can do, we're looking at Django and full web apps. I mean, you can basically say, I want to spin up and work on any kind of platform, and you can do that. You can even write Azure Functions with PowerShell, which I thought was pretty cool. So a lot you can do. Anyway, there's also, we talk a little about hybrid architecture. And the idea is you've got your on-prem physical, then you may have a virtualization on-prem, then you've got maybe some mixed environments. And one of the things Microsoft's been working towards is the idea that you can manage it all in one place. OpenStack is what had been called, let's say, the open source world version. Microsoft calls it Azure Stack, but it's sort of one place to do everything. And you can also do runbooks, which do hybrid. You can say, I'm going to do this, and I want to spin some things off to on-prem, some things local. And we're going to look at some data storage stuff. So I just provide sort of an overview here of like table storage, blob storage. So we'll create a blob, and some stuff here, infrastructure as a service, creating like a VM. And so the specific things I kind of want to go over with code is inquiring about resources, creating resources in Azure, modifying Azure's resources, shutting things down and removing things. And then I'm not going to talk about this, but you could even do application-specific things, like I want to load SQL databases with certain code or something like that, certain data. Okay, so the idea of this slide, of course, is Azure Classic was the original portal that you would go into in Azure. And it got really completely replaced with Azure Resource Manager, and the modules that you use in PowerShell are also different. So the old one was just called Azure. The new one's Azure RM. A little bit of caveat though, every now and then there's a piece that's only done in the old Azure module and you still have to use it. Most of the time they'll use Azure RM. So I call it the tale of two portals because up until a certain point you had Azure Classic. That's been pretty much phased out. You can still use it, but if you go to the regular portal, what you should be using, what Microsoft recommends, if possible, go to the new one. Big advantage is you can group resources now. So it's much more scalable. It was designed to say, I've got a box or a bag and I'm just going to throw my resources into it. I'm grouping them together. So I can do things like shut them all down. I can scale them out. I can do something like always on with SQL Server to make sure that I'm kind of duplicating, creating redundancies. And one of the things you can do also is like to keep your SLA, Microsoft may have to have Azure bring down certain machines to do things shortly. But if you have in a resource group several VMs, it can kind of rotate them and stuff. So it's a way to sort of share things. All right, so we'll do a quick little walkthrough of the Azure portal and kind of see what that looks like. The Azure module kind of maps to the portal. So it's a little almost to me like a macro thing. It's like, okay, what would I do here? I click here, say new VM, and there's a command line, new VM. Okay, then it says I need a network card. Well, then in PowerShell, there's a create new network card or new network card. And I need a physical address, new physical address. So it's kind of weird. You can actually step through what you would do in the portal through the GUI, and it's very similar to what you would do in the code.
Wouldn't it be nice if, as you did the GUI, it just built a script for you that corresponded to everything that you did that session?
Yeah, that would be cool.
It does.
A macro recorder like thing?
No, but for Azure RM, it will generate the resource manager template for you as you're creating the resources. So when you're like right before you hit go, or even after you hit go, create your resources, it'll actually, there's a way to hit export as template, and then you can get the Azure Resource Manager template out.
Yeah, does that as a JSON file basically, right?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean that's kind of, but that's, I don't know, it's actually, it's interesting because it's kind of the same concept as desired state configuration. You set up what you want your desired state to be in the JSON, and then push that in through an Azure Resource Manager commandlet, and then that will kind of get everything up for you. So yeah, so it won't record all the steps, but once you get used to using that template, it's actually much easier to just like define everything in your JSON and say go instead of having to run each of those steps individually.
Yeah, and you can actually use PowerShell to run that JSON file through too. One of the things that I'll show you here though is to have parameterized functions. So you can say, I want to create a VM, but I want you to call things like this. I'm going to use a simplified way. I'll say, here's a prefix. Just prefix all my resources with like Bryan, and then I'll have RG for resource group and VM for the VM and things like that. So the functions are good too. Like anything, if the function's automated and it's tested, it works. And then you can have the parameters do what you want. So, and you can, of course, if it's interactive, you can have it prompt you for things. In runbooks, it'll actually take your parameters and prompt you for the parameters, and it can have defaults. So it's kind of nice, gives you a little GUI interface to your parameters. But using the other way, you generate the JSON file is a good way to just spin it up and you get all the snapshot. It would be nice if they did the equivalent with PowerShell script. Like here's a step-by-step PowerShell script. Okay, so we get in here. I'm in the dashboard. I just signed in. Just went to the portal azure.com, I think it is, and you can see you have a dashboard to start. and you can pin things to the dashboard, whatever you think is most important. The challenge to Azure as AWS or any big cloud is there's so many different features and things out there that you can kind of get dizzy and looking at everything. But they do put some of the most common things you'd want to use as a default. So I can look at all resources, and this is like all my different pieces. I've got some runbooks out here and stuff, and some VMs, and you can do app services and SQL databases. So a SQL database is not the VMs type of thing, it's a service. So you can just say, I want to create a database as a service. The only thing I don't like about SQL database, it's great. However, it doesn't have SQL agent. It doesn't have any of the BI functionality. It gives you just a raw database. So it's good for OLTP more. SQL data warehouse is actually not SQL data. It's not a warehouse, or it's not SQL server. It's they used to be called APS. So it's parallel data warehouse. And the idea behind SQL data warehouses is it's multi-threaded. It's really like a big, what do you call it, appliance. So it's high performance, multi-threaded, that kind of thing. So it's a great service if you can use that and you want that high power. Then Cosmos DB. And then we got VMs, and of course we're going to look at VMs. So we've got some demos out here I've created. When you do create VMs in Azure, has anyone used Azure on like a test account? No? Okay. Anyone get burned by the costs? Yes, that's accruing. So
Sometimes.
yeah. So you want to make sure you shut them down. And you can go over here. Every time you click on something, they call this a blade. And typically within a blade, I'll go back here, I'll go to VMs. I can say, oh yeah, this VM. And if I click on it, it just goes into more things, and you get different properties. And you can play with things. We're going to look at tags. So tags are a way to just put special informational values attached to it, which is good if you want to know, like, who owns this machine? Oh, that's the special machine of the CEO. Don't touch it, you know, versus that's a dev machine or that's production. So you can do that kind of stuff. You get all these different pieces. And but when you're done, the other thing you can do is just click here, and you can do things like delete, start, or stop. So when you have something like this that's running, you might want to just say, let me find one that is running. You can say stop. And just be careful if you've got storage going on, like you just uploaded 10 terabyte of data, just stopping that doesn't stop the storage of that data. So be careful to delete things, and shut things down. But usually with my stuff, the only thing I really get hit for is these VMs that I forget to turn off. And it starts to chop away at your amount of time. So I've got like a MSDN license that gives me about $150 a month. But if I'm not careful, I can chew that up, and then I come to a presentation like this and can't do anything.
I added an awesome new feature where you can click on a VM and there's a shutdown schedule now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I have it set like all my VMs shut down at 2 a.m. every morning. That way, if I forget to shut them down, I don't get charged.
Yep, that's a great idea. And that is a neat thing. You can set schedules. Say if people don't use the VM on weekends or something, you can just like shut it off on weekends. Another idea might be also if you're doing PowerShell stuff, set up a script that just goes through all of them and just shut them all down, and then walk away because you don't want to be paying for these things. All right, so we get that. So we looked at.
Cost per hour, yeah.
Well, you get hit by that. You get hit for charges for licensing too. So if you're paying, that's why I was really excited about SQL Developer, because I'm not doing production. But if you're paying for Enterprise Edition of SQL Server, that's going to hit you with cost too. And that's like pretty expensive. I think it's like $50,000 or more a year or so.
For server licenses, they build that into the cost of the VM. But yeah, additional software you install on top of that.
I know, like Amazon, like they have AWS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It was like, this was years ago, but like the Linux box was like 10 cents an hour or something like that. I'm assuming the prices have gone up since then.
Yeah. Well, I think what I've seen, it depends what you're doing and stuff, and they're different. So generally, storage costs are pretty cheap on Azure, but other things can be more expensive. I don't know how it plays out, but my guess is it's like depending on what you're doing, some things are better and worse. Okay, so I wanted to point out the resource groups. So the idea here is I have a resource group, like I created this one the other day, and in this resource group, I've got my network security group, interface, public IP address, virtual, then the VM itself, and disk space. And one thing that when I walk through that is, first time I had to create a physical box, I'm not really a hardware guy, so I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff you got to create for this. I did it manually. I'm like, my God, this thing wants another question. I felt like I was in one of those surveys that they said would last 5 minutes, but it's going a half hour later. But finally, I got through it. And then when I was able to create a PowerShell script to do, I'm like, well, at least it's written. I could do this without going through that. But you get all this stuff. So, any questions on just the overall thing going ahead? The other thing I should point out is you have more services. So these are the things that are like extra things you might want to do. And in that, part of that is also creating automation runbooks and stuff. So you can go in there and find automation. There's also a bunch of other things we'll talk about a little bit, but it's a ton of stuff. There's a lot of good toys in there. Okay, so let me go over here a minute. I kind of lost my place here. Let me do a little. Oh, the other thing I want to point out is if you don't have the Azure RM module, there's a slide I provided, and I gave everyone. I put a link on the site. This slide tells you where to go, what to get, how to get the Azure RM module installed. If you have 5.0 or better of PowerShell, you should have no problems. You might have issues if you don't, so you might want to upgrade if you can. So if you're on something like Windows 7 or earlier, even worse, you might run into some issues. But generally, regular PowerShell is fine with almost anything, probably 3 or above. But if you're doing Azure, I'd recommend trying to do 5. All right, so let's do some demonstrations here. So one of the first things we're going to do when you want to do stuff automation is you want to log in. And there's one login Azure RM account, or that's just an alias for add Azure RM account. Everyone knows what, if you don't know something like alias, whatever, just ask. I'll say, but it's just another word for a mapping of a command line. So run that. Next. It takes a second, and if it works, you get this information telling you it worked. So you're in, and things you can do. I can't get this to work because I don't actually have a billable license. So I assume that's why it doesn't work. But if you're interested and you've got a billable license, that's one way to get your information. You do need a subscription to do anything with Azure. So that's kind of how they do bill you. Subscription is just like a magazine subscription. That's who they send the bill to. And one of the things you can do is like you do get Azure subscription. You can pipe into obviously select object. And here we're just pulling out certain properties. So if I get all of it, then it gives me kind of an overflow of information. And it kind of gives it that flat way. But if I do the select, I can just pull out what I'm interested in. And yeah. And here I can do piping where I'm taking the subscription name and then selecting just a few things out of it. And this is only the specific one I'm looking for. And if you want to get back to when you first logged in, it gives you some sort of your context, your environment information. That will give you that. So just get Azure RM context. So the key thing in here, now this automatically loaded, so I should show you. You would want to probably do import module. Oops. And that would be Azure RM. So that would be, I got this right. And it's loaded. And if you want extra information, you can just do like -verbose. And that will just give you the verbose messages. So you can see everything that's in there. All right, so another thing you can do if you want to get Azure, like get VMs, you can do that. Using format table, you can kind of clean it up so it gives you a little more clean return. You can just see what VMs you have, where they're located. I like Out Grid View. It's one of my favorite utilities, so you can do that, and then you can sort and look at things. And you can do filtering. I can say, oh, I only want PS and that kind of stuff, and I can look at criteria I want to add. So it's a really rich interface. For what it's worth, too, you can even have things like give somebody a list, and they can select from the list, and then you can, when they say, okay, we'll push it into a return, then you can take that in a variable, then iterate over. So you could say, which VMs do you want to start? This one, this one, this one. Go. And then you could just pull that in and cycle through them and stop them all, or stop them. And this one, I'm just kind of asking for a specific information by resource group name and resource name. So here you can look at a specific resource. And find is just going to like let you find something in your environment that you have that you want to look for. And I can also just, if I want to look at resource groups, I can just, so the pattern there is obviously get dash, and then what is it, Azure RM. So everything, all the command lines should be get, or whatever it is, verb dash Azure RM noun. As I mentioned, once in a while you'll see something, I've seen this where I'm like trying to do something, and in this specific case, it's just Azure, it's the old module. Hopefully that'll kind of get cleaned up because it's a little confusing. Okay, so the other thing I just want to stop talking a little about. So we're going to look at creating an object container, a blob, with a PowerShell. And here you can kind of see the way that they structure these things out. So first you create a storage account. Within the storage account, create a container. Within a container, you can create a blob. But then you also have things like tables and entities and queues and shares. And the share is really just a way to create something like a file directory, like a regular folder share that you might use. All right. All right, so let's see. So here I'm going to just do this. I'm a big fan of reusability, and if you have any questions, let me know, but I'm going right into functions. So you can do a lot of the same things with functions that if you've ever used more, like the dot sourcing with the script. You pass parameters, you return things. But functions are nice because you can wrap them up into a module, put them where your Powershell can access them, and reuse them wherever you need them. So I go right into it. The key thing is you want to put in this commandlet binding, because what this does is it's saying to PowerShell, I want to be just like the big players. I want to be just like a C# commandlet. And what C# commandlets can do is they leverage the PowerShell engine to handle about 30 parameters automatically. They take care of it for you. So if you've seen the verbose messages, that's an example. If you don't put in the commandlet binding, your functions will ignore the verbose messages always. They'll never use it. Same thing with confirm and write debug and all these statements. So there's a whole bunch of features you get just by putting that little line that says commandlet binding. By the way, does anyone use snippets? Okay, so a nice thing in the thing here is if I want to do something, Control J, and I can use snippets because I forget everything. And one of the things I sometimes want to do is I want to commandlet advanced function. So this gives me a template, and the tags are nice for get help because get help will pick up these tags and display it for people. And then I get my function, and the commandlet binding is already there. And I can have alias, I can do, and then my parameters. So this is nice if you get into a habit of using the scriptlets, snippets, then you can use these all the time, and it makes your coding a lot easier because you've got a standard library of how to code things. And it makes it a lot easier for you. You don't have to remember all these things. And this we're not going to talk about, but if you're supporting the pipeline, normally you'd include these 3 blocks. So if you wanted to be able to pipe into it, begin, process, and end is how you can write a function that supports people piping into your function. Okay, so yeah, nice to use snippets. You can create your own snippets. There's a new snippet commands and everything, so cool stuff. All right, so this is a function that says new UDF. So when I create functions, I like to put something that tells me this is not Microsoft's. This is my own thing, because if it breaks, I want to know if it's my code or it's Microsoft's code. More likely it's mine, right? So you don't mess with verbs. Microsoft will send the police after you if you use something other than a verb that's been approved. So they have the verb police. So make sure you follow it. There's a whole link you can go to, or you can just type in. Sorry, let me go here for a minute. Anyone know what you type in? That verb. And that will give you a list of all the approved verbs. So when you create your own functions, use a verb that's approved, dash, and then you can really do whatever you want because there's any objects in the world. But a good idea is what I do is use a 3-character prefix. I use UDF, like user-defined function, and then the object, like my machine, whatever it is. So this is new dash UDF UDF Azure blob, and then these are my parameters. And when you do this sort of param block, as a way to define parameters, there's a whole ton of things you can do to validate parameters, make sure they're within a list of valid values. For instance, validate set here says that only these values are allowed. Not only that, but IntelliSense will pick it up and display them. So that when somebody's trying to type it in, it'll help them figure out the values, because obviously Azure only knows what the proper values are. It's not going to let you put anything into some of these. So I'm using that. And then I put these comments in because I'll forget what they are. And write verbose is if you pass the verbose parameter, it will display it. Otherwise, it will not. Then it's going to say, okay, I need to create a new resource group. And this is one of the parameters you passed in. What do you want the resource group name to be? Storage account name, location SKU name. And this is where you kind of get into like the storage you want. And sometimes you need to just kind of wait a little bit because in Azure, it's creating a resource and you don't want to try to do something if it's not there yet. So one way to do that is just sort of do a start, sleep, wait a little bit. Another write verbose, and now it's going to create set the storage account. And finally, it's going to create the container. So I'm going to run through this and let's see, hopefully everything works good. Oops. Let's see. Oh, I already have this storage account. So when you try to do something twice, so PO blob, let's see, storage account name, it's created as 3x, container name 5x. Any questions while this is running? Okay. So this is one of the reasons why you want to be able to push things into background jobs, because you don't always have to sit here waiting for things to run. When I create a VM, sometimes like you wait 15 minutes. Usually on videos, I'll say, I'm going to go get lunch. I'll come back. Yeah, so you get this kind of thing. But this should only take a couple of minutes. So the nice thing with this is I can use this sort of name parameter. Okay, so I created my blob. I can see it's out there. And I can do things like, so here, if I look at SKU, oops, it's still not done. There, finally finished. Created the Azure account. But what I was hoping to do here is let me just, comes up and it's because of the validation set, it gives me the valid value. So that's a nice feature. So if you had this in a module and you give it out to people, they'll automatically get prompted for proper values. You can also do things to say it's mandatory, and you can say, I've even written something where it calls a function. The function looks up in a SQL Server table and says, this is the list of valid customer accounts. You can't use another one. So those are great ways of really making things robust. Okay, so that created a little blob. Look at another thing, so modifying resources. Okay, so I'm going to clear host. Clear host will just clear the console. And I'm going to use my resource group, my storage name. And remember I mentioned before tags. So how many people here actually have resources? Anybody have resources that are actually in production in Azure? Okay. So I would assume, safe to say that some of those are really important and others are less critical? Okay. Do you guys use tags at all?
Mostly for shutdown schedules.
Okay.
We do.
You do?
But,
Okay.
yeah.
We
Shutdown.
require tags. We use AWS and we're moving to Azure.
Okay.
And we require that all resources deployed in either service have a specific set of 9 tags on them.
That's good.
It contains things like, what department
Yeah,
owns
exactly.
it and who
Yep.
they're responsible, who the
Yep.
contact person
Yep.
is.
Yep.
Whether it's production or non-production.
I think it's an excellent idea. I think that's a good best practice. Just like programmers, you'd say, make sure you always have these comments: who wrote it, when, why. And I think you want that because there's nothing intuitively in looking at Azure. You don't know that this is a critical production machine or it's just Harry down the street that decided to create a VM and went home. And you really need something.
In our case, we do chargeback too.
Yeah.
We're a lot of cases we're managing resources that belong to the department. So
Yeah.
we've got 300 things out there. We need to know who gets billed for which resources.
Good. Okay. So I'm going to show you an example of how to create tags and do things with tags in PowerShell. So first, I'm going to just create my objects I want to tag. Those are stored in that name. And to set a tag here, by doing this, everyone know what a hash table is?
Yep.
Okay. So it's just a key value pair. It's an object in PowerShell, just like in Python or anything else. And the way I can do it is set Azure RM resource, and I'm telling it what the resource name is. It's my storage group and the resource group, and then what type of data it is. This is going to clear it out because it's an empty tag set.
They also call them dictionaries.
Yeah, Python dictionaries, correct. Yeah, so they're really easy to create. And so this is clearing out, I think because of the getting a slow response, but that'll clear out the tags. Then I can go in and I'm looking at setting a tag, which is the department and the environment. Okay, so that set the tags up. You can kind of see it came back. And so now what I'm looking, I'm going to say set the tags, and it's going to set department is IT, environment is test. And then I'm going to run this. And if you run, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but if you run something in parentheses, what it's returned automatically becomes encapsulated as an object with the properties as opposed to have to assign it to a variable first. So if you need to do something. Another time where took me a while to figure it out when I first hit this. But if you ever try to pass a parameter and you've got a function that's going to return something that's passing a parameter to get another function, so you're kind of nesting it, you need to enclose it in parentheses because otherwise it won't do it in the correct order. It will start left to right and it says, wait a minute, I don't know what you mean. You just passed the commandlet name. Put in parentheses, the commandlet resolves the data value, pushes it back, and then it passes it. So, all right, so here I'm going to run this just to see what the tags say. So we can see these values are here. And now what I'm going to do is I want to put another value in, but because the entire thing's one hash table, I have to pull out the previous values before I put in a new, otherwise I'm overlaying it and I'll lose what I had. So the first thing is I'm going to grab tags from and do the get Azure RM, and I'm pulling in the tags in the first line. I'll display it just to say, yep, that's what it's got. And then what I'm going to do is now do a plus equal, and that's a way of appending on yet another sort of row in the hash table. And then if I set this, so now I'm going to set that. And that should get the tags. So you can see now the tags are there. So that's kind of a pattern. If you want to attach tags, you can just pull what's there in, do what you need, set it, and go back, and you do good. And if you need to display what they are, you can just use the get. Let's see. Okay, so another thing we can do is we can, I've already should be signed in, so I'll just get my VMs. And I can see, let's look at one that's not running. Let's see. It doesn't actually tell me which is running here, so let me go over here for a sec. All right, so I don't have PS demo 1 VM. It's not running. So I'm going to start PS demo 1 VM. And resource group name should be, if I got this right, have a very simple standard. So that should be just RG. That should start it up. And you can go usually over here and you can start to see, so it says stopped, but at some point it should come and start saying it's starting to work on starting it. If you create a VM, you'll start to see in the portal, you can see it creating it and see what's going on. This can take a little while, these kind of things, but let me go back here. You can see starting. Yeah. So that's a simple way you can just start and stop. Everything you tend to do that you notice as a resource group associate, so it always wants you to tell it what resource group does this belong to, and then what is it you're working on. And I can say I can stop the same way. It's still starting, so I'll leave this, but you can just do the same thing. So very easy to stop. Another thing you do, this is a great way, if you just want to say, I want to shut down everything, just say get Azure VM, push it into start or stop, and you can start them all, or you can stop them all. So that's a simple one-liner that you can use to just shut everything down before you go home. If you want to remove resources, you can just use the remove resource and define what it is, and then that will delete the resource. And you can even remove an entire resource group, just say by remove Azure RM resource group. Because that's, you got to be careful because it's going to blow away a lot of stuff if you delete a resource group. Okay. How many people have written functions in PowerShell? Okay. And everybody's used advanced functions? Okay. So I'm going to review. So this is the speech function we looked at earlier, that I ran. I'll show it to you in a sec. But advanced function because it has command-line binding. There is a short format for doing functions, kind of quick and dirty. You ignore command-line binding, you don't do the parameter, you just say function, function name, parentheses, name your variables. And that's one way to do it. But you lose the functionality. So here you've got command-line binding, and that's what really binds you to the command-line, all those common parameters. And then you can put your thing in, the equal sign gives it a default. So if you don't put anything there, it will use that. And then we have write verbose, and then you have this stuff here, like what you're creating a new object. So this is creating a COM object. These are all the common parameters you get when you do this. So you get these all these advantages. So debug and all these. I'll take a look at a couple of these just to kind of give you, make sure we talk a little about it. So looking at, So this is the invoke UDF speech. Oh, this is the incorrect format, sorry. Um, Okay, so we can see here, we've got the command line binding, speech thing, and we got write verbose, and then we can say we're going to invoke speech. Not sure why that's still running, so I'm just stopping it. And what I'm going to do here is just run it.
PowerShell is awesome.
Okay. So you can see the
That's so cool.
verbose comes out here because we gave it the verbose parameter. So that's really cool. But what if I did, so we'll say debug. I think that was probably Azure coming with a message.
PowerShell is awesome.
Oh, shit, I don't have a right debug, so that would help. So if I put a right debug in here,
PowerShell is awesome.
in the debug, the second execution prompts me, it says, do you want to continue, do you want to halt? Now, if you halt or if you suspend, you can do things within the CLI. And notice it's got a double prompt. You're actually nested. You're actually operating within your function. So you're seeing the memory, you're seeing what's there, and you can play around and debug right within it. So it's very much like your watch thing in a normal debug. You can look around, play. And when you're done, you can say exit or I think resume. And you go back, it says, and it just returns to this. And it will say, sure, yes.
PowerShell is awesome.
Okay. So the debug is handy. It's a great way to stop things, play around. It's good for programming. I like the verbose because when I'm writing stuff, I can give lots of messages, and it's a great development feature because you put things in like I hit this part. Maybe it's a long script. This worked. This did this. This did this. But I may not want to always see it. But if it's in production with support for verbose, and somebody says it's crashing, it's not working, and I can do it safely or take a copy, I can run it with verbose, get lots of messages, figure out what's wrong, and then deploy it, and just people don't use verbose unless they really want to see a lot of junk. So it's a really nice feature. Debug can also be used kind of like that, but it tends to interrupt it.
It's sort of like setting breakpoints.
The debug is debug one is more like a breakpoint, yeah. And there's a automatic variable in PowerShell that sets your error level and things that controls whether or not, by default, write verbose is ignored because the error level is set to not silently continue. But when you do write verbose, you pass the parameter, it dynamically changes that setting so that it won't silently continue. It shows it. Same with debug.
That script I told you about where I clean up the C drive.
Yeah.
Not all of the drives have all the, because there's some where they're VMware
Yeah.
Hosts.
Yeah.
And there's files in a certain directory.
Yeah.
So I just do a silently continue. Because I know I'm going to get an error if it's not a VMware host.
Yeah. Yep. I was going to say something else you might find useful is if you put in the parentheses the command line binding support should process, you can also do confirm and you can do what if, which is really handy if there's anything dangerous, like especially say a registry edit. It can come in and you say what if, and it will give a message like what if I would delete your files, what if I would change your registry settings, and then you can take off the what if parameter and it will do it, but it doesn't execute the statement. So it's a great way to sanity check, like, okay, let me run through all this, make sure it's not going to break anything, you know, that kind of stuff. Have you ever used that, Ken? Use a what if or suspends?
Not the what if.
Okay.
Suspend. I use the command line binding.
Okay.
mainly to get the verbose.
Okay. Yeah, so you just put in support should process in there. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it kind of takes a while, but it's a really great feature. And if you have any questions, you want to try it, let me know. I can send you code samples. There might be one or two in here.
I use it for testing.
Yep.
You know, if I'm testing the script, I fill it with right verbose, and then I can see what's doing, and just get that parameter and running it.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. So these are all the different things you can do, what ifs and everything of when you put support should process, out variables, error variables, a lot of good debugging kind of stuff.
And I think you were mentioning before, but if you set verbose preference, which is a built-in
Yeah.
like shell variable,
Yeah.
It'll show verbose on everything you run, which is pretty useful if you're hacking around with something and
Yeah.
understand like,
Exactly. And that's the thing. PowerShell has certain configuration variables which control how it runs in the environment. The other ones are automatic variables like that where it dynamically is setting values and restoring them. Has anyone ever used PS script root? Okay. So what does PS script root do?
So it gives you well, in PowerShell 3 and above,
Yeah.
it gives you the path of your the directory that your current script lives in.
Correct.
So not like your working directory, but the
Now,
directory that.
yeah.
But yeah, you have to kind of write a shim if you're going to use it in PowerShell 2.
Interesting. Okay. So hopefully we're above PowerShell 2, but
Hopefully.
yeah. But what's really great about that is it's great for training and stuff, but also if you want to be able to give somebody a set of functions or scripts, you can put data files in with it, and by referencing PS script root, you can make sure you're reading all your data files from the same place the script is running, so it becomes more independent. You don't have to configure and change things when people get it. Another related one is PS module path. PS script root also works with modules. So if you load a module, when it's in there, you can reference things to the module local to the directory. So a great example would be, maybe you have configuration settings you want to use across the board. You could have a file, my database module, and it will set the production database settings, all those other things. They could be in an external file. Just change the settings depending on your server. It pulls it up, and when you load it, it's automatically getting the values correct for that machine. So it's a good way to make it kind of extensible or reusable.
Like $0 in a bash script.
Yep. Yeah. By default, you wouldn't have that in Windows to know where you're at one point. So it's really handy. But yeah, it's a good point. So the other thing I want to talk about resource groups a little bit too is when you think of resource groups, it's kind of a container, and it has things like here we've got a user account or operating system. So it's like a big picture of a VM with just everything under a resource group. We could have multiple resource groups. And when we're creating a VM, what we need to create within it is we need a user account. We're going to have to tell it what operating system we want. We have to say, Active Directory pieces, like settings for that. If we want things to be installed, we're going to have to tell it an image or what we need. We have to tell it what IP addresses, load balancers, disk fob, requires subnet, network interface card, storage account, virtual network. So there's a lot of pieces that you kind of have to create. All right, so I'm going to go into a demo, and I'm going to combine a few things. So it's good I got the group here because you guys won't get lost. Sometimes I kind of but because it can be hard. But so jobs are really useful in PowerShell, and I didn't appreciate this myself until recently. I'm like, wow, these are really very helpful, especially when you're doing stuff with Azure and stuff, because you can push things off and you don't have to wait. So there's two types of jobs. There's unscheduled and scheduled. When you create scheduled jobs, you're actually interacting with Task Manager. And so it's really behind the scenes creating Task Manager jobs for PowerShell. Generally, I would say try to use PowerShell to manage those jobs rather than changing them, because I think if you tweak things too much, like anything, I don't know if the commandlets will then be able to work with those jobs. But you can use scheduled jobs. So I'm not going to show the scheduled jobs so much, but to look at those, just look for the commandlets that say verb like start dash schedule job blah. So it's usually something like that. With regular jobs, things like start dash job or whatever, it's usually just job. There's some overlap, because if you say something like receive job or whatever, it's going to be the same. So it's a little bit, depends on what you're doing. The ones that say schedule job typically have to do with things that would relate to a schedule, like what is the trigger for the job, things like that. But all right, so let's take a look. So we're going to do a couple of demos here. Did that one. Okay, I'm going to kind of jump around here. I'm going to try to show you something. I think this is where it is. Show you something, creating a VM in the background. I'm going to use a service principal, and then I'll show you what a service principal is and how to create one. But I want to kind of get to the sort of end game and say, why would we want it? How would we use it? So. Let me just check it might be here. All right, so to do something in the background, we're going to look at, I'm going to use a commandlet, which this right here, and this commandlet is going to use a service principal to log in and do something in Azure. The reason I want to do this is because otherwise I have to go in and manually interact with Azure and say I'm logging in. That's not going to be good if I want to run a job at 2 in the morning. It's also not going to work in Batch because Batch has its own environment. So when it gets into the Batch side of it, it's going to say, okay, log in. And I won't have interaction with it. It's disconnected from me. So once I've got the service principal created, which is under this application display name. I can run things, hopefully no problems here, and it will submit it. So what a service principal is, it's not always required, but let me back up a bit. When you want to connect to Azure, like anything, you need credentials, right? You need to have an account. I'm authorized to get in. And if you're on an Active Directory domain, then you probably can use Active Directory and you're authorized and someone can grant you the authority to do that. But do people here use it at all with a regular email account or something that's not a company domain? Okay, so that's what I do because I have a MSN account or you have Hotmail or Outlook. You're not going to be able to automate anything. By default, you're kind of like, okay, now you're stuck with always having to manually do things. You can run scripts, but you always got to be there. So I'm going to show you with creating a service principal that you can remove that problem. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a script block. And a script block is really nothing more than a variable that holds a function or holds a block of code. And the way you create is just variable name equals, and then you just basically embraces define all of your code. So I'm going to call it $script BOK. And what I'm going to do here is say start job. And one of the things you can do when you start a job is give it a script block to run. So it should be able to run this. And it kicks it in, and now this is running in the background. It's not a scheduled job because I just did it on the fly. And if I say get job, you can see it says it's running. So completed. And I can either use the name or the ID to pull it up. So I'm going to use the name. Names are great as long as you don't have more than one. So it just shows me, I asked for, if I look up here, I did a couple of things. I first imported my module. So if you're going to do something in batch, you have to import any modules you're going to use because it needs what it's going to work with. And I use my service principal, and I create something in the background that has the password stored in text, but it's secure. And then I'm just using this function, get Azure RMVM. And you can see here it just gives me a list of my VMs. So it's verbose, but it's working. And I could use receive job to get it back. And again, if I just run get Azure RMVM, you just get this stuff. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to create a block, and it's going to input a module, again, UMD Azure, and this has the functions. I'll take a look at that in a minute. Right now, I'm just all encapsulated. And I'm telling it to use the same application display name. I got to tell it what I'm going to do. I'm going to have it log into Azure with the service principal. So it's a batch mode. And this is going to create an entire VM without me being in attendance. So it's going to submit it. If it works well, I'll be glad. A lot of pieces here, but it should run this in the background. And so I can see it's doing that. And I don't expect to see this to come back immediately. Oh, I think I screwed up. I think I have that VM already there. Let me take a look. Yeah, so I got this one. So that'll probably break. But not to worry, I'll create a fourth. Well, the nice thing, since it's not in the forward round. And to make this, I'll change the job name to give me a unique job name. So we're going to do another script block. And I'll do get job. First one's blocked, so it might be because the other VM's already up and running. Let's see if this second one runs. So that's this one. But see, regardless of what happens, we can see at least now, unlike before, it's waiting, saying it's going to complete. This is running in the background. I can leave. I can let it finish, and I don't have to wait. I can do other PowerShell things. Because a lot of these things block you in PowerShell, so your choice is create another PowerShell session and try to do things, or if you can push them into the background. You could also set this up as a scheduled job to say, 2 in the morning, here's parameters. I want you to create 3 or 4 VMs. I'm not here. I'm going to be sleeping, but nobody's on the system. Good time to create these machines, maybe bring something down. So you can do all this kind of stuff. The service principal lets you do that. So this is another one. Let me just, for a minute, go over to creating a service principal for a minute.
Requires a get credential, isn't it?
Say what?
It requires a get. Is that having to do with credentials?
It uses a credential only as part. The only part it needs a credential for is you don't need a credential if you use a service principal to connect to Azure. But when you create a VM, you do need a credential.
It's Azure specific. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's using the PS. What you really have is an Active Directory account. So let me. I should explain what that is. A service principal is actually an Active Directory application account. So a good best practice anyway is if you say, I have a web service batch job running, maybe I have a web service batch account that's meant to do that, as opposed to Harry's account, which we've attached to it. So you want to normally do that as a best practice anyway. We have certain batch jobs you want to run, secure them, give them only the authorization they need to do these jobs, and you call it, web account 1, web account 2, whatever it is. Maybe this is a DBA account 1, that kind of stuff. And that's what a service principal really is. And so when it's going in, this is connecting with that, and it does have some stuff behind the scenes. I'm going to show you what it does to create a service principal. But the service principal, the credentials, what it needs, it can pull out in the script and do what it needs to do. So I'll take a walk through like what the service principal is creating. So when you want to create modules, right, you have to put them where a place. There's a variable called $PS module. Excuse me, $PS module path, and that points to where PowerShell will look for modules. One of the places it will look by default should be under your C:users folder, your home path, under Documents, under Windows PowerShell, under Modules. Even if that path doesn't exist, it's looking there. So it'll just ignore it. But if you need to do modules, you need to create it. And one of the ones I have created is UMD Azure, and this is the UMD Azure. And so this is creating a new VM. But let me get to the PS module script. Okay.
So it seems like you have a whole bunch of scripts that you've written for kind of like imperatively, configuring Azure.
Right.
Are you planning on moving to this kind of like desired configuration state or desired state configuration?
Well, you could do desired state configuration with Azure, and you can use PowerShell to do that.
No, I know, but I'm saying like it seems like before there's desired state configuration, you'd have to write a bunch of scripts to kind of like deploy things following some imperative pattern.
Right.
Now that there is desired state configuration, which do you prefer?
I think there are two different purposes. So creating a new objects, that's PowerShell. I'm going to say create new VMs, give it this, I want it to have this account. That you have to have the physical object before you can use desired state configuration. But once you have your machine basically there, you can say, I require that SQL Server run on this machine, and if that's not running, start it.
So basically, you need the infrastructure available.
Correct.
First.
Yeah.
Well, kind of think of it as like you have a set of tools that help you with the deployment of the things, and then you have a set of, like DSC helps you describe the configuration you want those things to have.
Gotcha.
The desired state stuff doesn't kick in until the thing's actually up and running.
Right.
Gotcha.
Although one of the patterns that Microsoft has presented is that you can have a utility server that basically you apply desired state configurations to, and if those desired state configurations are doing things like ensuring machines exist, then it runs kind of as a remote operation. So instead of it running on that machine itself, it can then run on this other server. So it's not actually applying the state to that server, and so it's kind of like mixing of the ideas there, because it's not the desired state for that server, but it's a desired state for something. And so you can do it that way. But ARM templates, resource manager templates, are kind of the newer way of doing that. So there was a demo of doing this for Azure stuff using desired state configuration a couple of years ago, but now everything seems to be moving to ARM templates. So you just define in JSON instead of desired state configuration. And then you have your machine, your network, like that whole picture that had all of the things you needed to define. That's just one JSON blob. You can just
But you still have to.
one command.
So with the JSON blob, you would still have to change different pieces. Like if you said, well, I want this storage to be increased and I want the names to be different, you'd have to change the template, right?
Well, you change the parameters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it has those
Okay.
things in.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if you have a standard way of creating machines and networks, but you just need to change the name and the size of the VM and like maybe disk size, then you define like 3 parameters at the top of the template. Everything else is standardized, and then you just pass in those parameters.
I have templates that do that. You pass in the name of the machine, what resource group it needs to belong to, and the tags, the required tags, and what VNet it's supposed to be attached to, and then the template goes and creates the thing that does all of that.
So can you include conditional logic though in a template?
Yes, in a kind of a limited way.
Okay.
There are template functions. You can do things like, you can test whether a value is, a value higher or lower than this. It's got kind of a rudimentary logic capability. I've tried working with it, and I've had some trouble. I don't know if other people have. It works in kind of a funky way. Trying to express programmatic concepts inside of a JSON format is
So it seems to me like the best way is probably look at which works best. So if you had somebody submitting and saying, I want a general accounting VM created and you need certain variables, like, okay, well, that's a bigger machine and it has some variance in it, then you might use Powershell script.
You might
even just figure out which one you need and then run the.
I would externalize that logic and put it into the parameters. So that as part of one of the things in the parameters, what size you want the VM to be, for example. You just pass it in because those are all just things that the deployment engine reads during the processing of that template. I've collected a set of templates that we're going to probably start using. But that's how you do the automation, the deployment automation. Is you find a way to automate the process of feeding information to these templates and then shoving the template into the other deployments.
Cool.
They require you to use resource manager templates for certain things now, like Logic Apps, the only way to deploy them is through resource manager templates.
Can you use the templates for on-prem stuff?
If you have Azure Stack.
Yeah.
I'm trying in my head figure like what you can mix between them, but
The templates are really input to what appears to be a deployment engine. And it consumes that and figures out dependencies like, if I have a VM, do I have to make sure I put the storage account down before I attach the drive to it. And it figures out all of that and deploys. You can kind of watch it working.
Yeah, I got to play more with the definition like that because it seems there's a sort of a sweet spot where you want to use both depending on what it is. If my sense would be, and I don't know, maybe you've used like AWS stuff, but if you were kind of not sure what environment you wanted to stay with, it might be good to make sure whatever you do can move around easily, not change.
And we're using Terraform for that because I don't know if you've seen Terraform, but it's kind of very similar to resource manager templates in that things are defined in a JSON-like language, and it actually for Azure it transforms things into resource manager templates, but it can also do cloud formation on AWS.
Cool.
That can do VM, vSphere, automation.
Okay. So let me just go through this quickly. And so this in my module, I have this new UDF Azure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I got to run, but I just want to. I'm actually with the DevOps CT group.
Sure.
So if anyone here is interested in joining that, check us out on Meetup. We also have a conference coming up in Hartford, right around the corner from here. In a month. Hopefully you've heard of it. It's called DevOps Days. It's nonprofit. There's some really good tracks in there.
Is that tied to Microsoft or just general DevOps? Or?
Nope. But Microsoft, maybe Substance, still working with them.
Well, if you got my link information, send me an email. I could sign up if you're looking for speakers or something.
Yeah.
You probably know Jose.
Yeah.
He sits right next to me.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
I'll stream it live if you want.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we're streaming this live.
That'd be awesome. Well, anyway, we also have a Slack, so if you guys want to come talk, we have like a separate Windows channel in there. So if you guys want to talk about this stuff outside of, I don't know how to get that information out, but I kind of send it to you and then.
Sure.
Yeah, send it through the meetup. Everybody, you should be able to talk to anybody in this room.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll definitely be back. This is awesome. So
Good.
Thank you very
All right.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good night.
All right. So just kind of go over this. Is this useful for people? Because I don't want to bore you to death.
It's fantastic. I just realized I forgot to turn the lights on for my dog. I'm trying to figure out which app turns the lights on.
Okay. So just to kind of go through creating a service principal.
Good
That's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel scared.
So in this case, I'm just taking parameters resource group that is going with the subscription ID. Application display name is really what you want to call the service principal. Think of that as your account name. And then you pass in the password when you create it. So this is the creation piece of it. And what I do here is when you create a VM, you have to give it an account. You don't have a choice. You have to give it some sort of admin account and a password for it, separate from the person who owns the whole subscription. So I'm creating a path here, and I'm using PS script so I can store it local to where the module is, so that I know where to get it when I want to retrieve it, because the other part of it's also there, the part where I sign on, and I put it into the cred subdirectory. So if I look under Just kind of see where this is going to go. Windows PowerShell, modules, and then UMD Azure. I have a lot of these, as you can see from my demos, but I'm storing the user ID password as a compressed, really just the password I think is in here. But what you have to do with service principal is a little bit of a pain, because you need the app ID, the tenant ID, and the password. And that's going to all go together in the service principal. And I'm generating all that and then going to store it. So I just tell it where I'm going to put things by defining my variable for cred path. And then here I'm going to be creating my password, and I'm using convert to secure string, and I pass the password in as plain text. So this is a standard way to take something and securitize it.
It will still bug you and say that you're taking plain text, because I do the same thing.
Yep.
And I think the force will keep it from complaining.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then in here what I'm doing then is taking this and putting it out to a file, which looks like binary junk when you're done. And from that, it's going to keep it there basically to give me credentials when I want to log in. Here I'm importing a part of the Azure RM module I need to basically complete what I'm doing. And here I'm just saying if I don't have a subscription ID, then I just use the default context. Otherwise, I set it. And here I say if I don't have a resys group, I kind of do the same thing. And then here I'm assigning the application display name. And so I'm using the command like here to create my application display name. And I have to give it the path. And so it's kind of just making something generic out of what you need to pass in here, putting the password in. And then here it's setting up the service principal. So it's creating the service principal, and it's passing in the parameters it needs. And then here it just gets it back so that it confirms it worked. And then this piece can sometimes get a little glitchy because it's actually waiting for that to happen so that it can assign a role. And here it's going to say assign a role, and I give it owner because I'm giving it kind of a lot of authority, but you can be specific. And you say application ID, so it's identifying what application this goes with, the scope, and error action. So I just say if you don't complain, basically. And then here I get the role, and it's trying a couple of times in case something goes wrong. And I have a link above. I stole most of this from someone else and then tweaked it to sort of a more reasonable script. And see, okay. And then here it's persisting the application ID, putting out to a file with basically the application display name, app ID, tenant ID, and we already did the password. So it's all there, the 3 pieces. And when I'm done, I return $ application. It's just a way to give a function and return back that it worked, and it gives you the application name back. So that would create the service principal. And when I want to use it now, I can just call the new UDF Azure RM login service principal, and I can do that from batch as we saw. And I'm giving the parameters mandatory. You've got to give me this application display name. Everything else it's going to assume is where the module is stored. So here I build my path to where it should find everything. And I grab my 3 pieces that I'm going to need, app ID, password, tenant ID. And I display things for both so I can see that it's doing what it's supposed to, create the credential object, and then I can do the Azure RM login. And here I use my credential, but I also have the service principal, and then I give it the tenant ID. And now it has what I need to do a background login. So it's a lot of pieces, but the script is out there so you can play with it. And if you pass something in, it should be able to do that if you have, the basic pieces.
Question?
Yep.
Does the service principal you're creating is persistent, correct?
Yes.
So do you have to go through periodically and clean them up after they accumulate, or is this?
Well, I'm playing around, but in a real world, you'd be defining it with like the business, like any other AD situation. So you'd say,
Yeah.
I'm going to be running my database maintenance, and I need an account. So you'd set up an account for that. And ideally, it's going to persist. You want to keep it around,
Right.
And you shouldn't be creating lots of them.
Okay, this is really just a demo example.
Yeah.
Creating them on demand.
Yeah, but you might have, if you were, say, an administrator for security, I could picture using this, setting up the parameters, and then you just call it when somebody says, I need it, and you verified it's legit. Maybe if a different environments, dev, test, etc.
Yeah.
You might give them accounts and stuff. But it's not something you're going to be creating thousands of them, hopefully. And my purpose really was for my training purposes because I don't have a legit domain account. But I found I talked to a lot of people. A lot of people have the same problem. They're saying, well, I have a MSN account or an Outlook account, and you can't do it unless you have a domain to work with. So, no. All right. So this does the login, and it just gets the pieces. And I think that's that piece. And go back to Okay, the other piece I'll kind of step through. This is my complete demo. Now, the one thing that this is an interactive one, I have a function. And the thing that this does is it automatically prompts you to log in because it doesn't have a service principal. And then it has to build a credential and do all those things. So I'll go to the batch version just to kind of show that. This one asks for the same basic parameters, but instead it's creating the credential dynamically, so it's not asking me interactively for the credentials. It didn't ask me to log on to Azure RM. Again, it's asking me for the credential here, so it can create the admin account for my VM. So it's a separate account from my subscription, and I'm just building the stuff here. So I'm real high secure password, something 123 question mark, and then just giving it Cafferky and that password. And then here it's like just building my tags and writing some nice verbose. I have to create my resource group first. Then I'm creating my subconfig. Then I create my VNet with all these pieces, and each piece kind of builds on each other. So a very common parameter with PowerShell is when you build things, bring it back into a variable, because oftentimes something else is going to need that. Like you get a credential, now pass the credential somewhere. You get a VM reference, and as you know, it's really not a complex object. Somewhere else may want that VM reference to say, oh, you want to create a resource group, where's your VM reference? Or resource group is a good example. I need your resource group. So a really good pattern in PowerShell is kind of layer your things, grab my object, need it, okay, grab this, and then plug them in as you need them, and you kind of build as you go forward. And so I need my public IP address, and then I can set that, my network security group role. And then I need my NIC card. And then you create this object using all these pieces that I just mentioned. And you pass them all in, and you build basically a big blob or a big complex object with all those pieces into a VM config. And finally, you can say, give me a new Azure RM VM, not new VM, and you just pass in the config, which has all that cluster of stuff you built, and it can build a VM for you. And here I just do a get just to confirm it worked and it's there. And so that creates that. Does that make sense? It's all good? Okay. Again, you should have all the code, so have fun. Ask me questions if you have any when you get to it. Okay, so kind of going back to where we were, here's where we created a new service principal. That's what this would do. It's just passing in the pieces. And here it's using the login. And we saw already the script blocks. Let's see if get job. Okay, it looks completed. Let's go over here. And there's our new VM, so it worked. Yay. So we got a VM and all those pieces that worked and connected to it. And to be honest, it's what I love about that is I was able to do that, do other things, and I'm not tied up. So I could spin them. But so maybe you want to create 10 different VMs with different flavors. You could spin them all for background jobs. Same pattern if you've ever used PS remoting. Same thing, you might want to spin off things to remote servers. You might have 1,000 servers to administer, so PS remoting, you could spin them all off to 1,000 machines all working at the same time. Comes back when you're done, so you can get a lot more work done that way.
Can you actually like remote desktop into those?
You can, yeah, and that's actually, I was playing around a little bit, and to do PS, you can remote desktop directly and no problem at all. PS remoting is a little more to it, and I'm still playing around, but I'm trying to remember, I think you can use, either you can use like a thumbprint or something, or you can use a PS service principal to kind of PS remote in. But in theory, you should have no problem just treating any VM that you've got in Azure just like a VM on-prem, as long as you get the credentials straight. You can spin off work. And you can,
Azure, do they only offer Microsoft products as their VMs?
no, they've got anything you want. Ubuntu, all kinds of versions of Linux, whatever you want, really.
Xenix?
If they can find it, maybe. Yeah.
They're selling it.
They have a whole gallery. Oh, there's another thing I want to show you. So, when you see this pieces, right? You need these 3 pieces. So you go to the gallery. This is the part that I found challenging. I go in online and I can look through a nice little gallery and say, oh yeah, I want that. And you pick it up and you can do it interactively. Not so easy through PowerShell because you have to know what's the publisher, what's the offer, and what's the SKUs. So I had to figure out, like, okay, how do I get to those? I had to move. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, I just need to figure out where I was. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is, I need to get out as a publisher. I can use this. Not all gallery items are in every area, so you have to tell it what location you're looking at. And then I'm going to filter that through where object. And when I was first doing it, I'm like, well, I don't know if they say Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft something, do they abbreviate? So I said, let me look for anything that starts with micro. And so that kind of gave me the first piece. And you can see there's a lot of different things in here, but I can look around until I find something that looks like SQL Server. I say, great. And I did find that. So the publisher is not really just the company, it's actually the product as well. So now I can use that to get the image offer. A second. And now you can see these are images. So there's a pattern to this. You can see, so it's SQL 2017, and this is the server is 2017, so Windows Server 2016, should say. And finally, I want to make sure I'm not paying for this. So I want to get the dev edition, so I need to get the SKUs. And you can see it here. So SQL Dev. If I use Enterprise, I get charged a bundle of money that I don't need to be charged, so SQL Dev is great. But there's like thousands of different configurations of products and things. So if you say, I want a high-powered data center server, you can do that. You say, I want a web server, you can configure that. And this is basically the same pattern because, again, going from the GUI to what you need to do in code is not an easy mapping, and there's no easy way to get there, yeah. But this seems to work. Yeah.
Once you, I had a question that just left me. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. If you forget, you can always email me that. But so here you can just say, like, here I'm trying to list images that fit these
What's the
criteria.
difference between the dev and the production? Is it just size?
No. Well, you mean the server enterprise? So SQL Server Enterprise is the most expensive version of SQL Server.
Mm-hmm.
They charge you for those features. SQL Server Developer is free because you're understanding, and it's not really enforced. You're getting Enterprise Edition. They're telling you you shouldn't be using this for production work, meaning you're using terabytes of data, and they'll probably report back somewhere like you're violating the license. But the idea of SQL Server, you can actually download it for your own machine, and you can get the full-blown Enterprise Edition. And Microsoft's like, great. But now, as a consultant, for instance, it's great. I can do that. I can learn. I can develop work. But if I'm going to actually go into an office and deploy it, then I have to pay for it because somebody's using it in a production.
So, but there's no difference between they don't limit like what commands you can use.
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
It's great. Because even features like partitioning, which is an enterprise feature, you can do. All the BI stack is there. Our integration server is there. So you can really do everything. So.
But it's not licensed for any production use.
No, although I will say this, it's interesting because I had a client and we're deploying a brand new data platform. And as long as we're developing, we can use it for free. Now, once you get to, on-prem, whatever, but once you get to the point you say, now we're going to move it to a production instance, they're really reporting off it, they're doing stuff, you got to pay. They kind of do a get you, though, too, because now you may get used to some of those advanced enterprise features. And when you go to production, you're going to have to pay for them if you don't want to remove them. So it's kind of smart they do that, because if they gave you standard edition free, well, then you're pretty good. You're going with the cheapest edition when you go live. But this way they kind of...
I've been through an audit when I worked at the Hartford. They don't miss anything.
Yeah.
They're going to get you.
Yeah.
No, and it wasn't even you guys. It was actually, we hired out a third party. They still got it. They got us on behalf of you.
But it's actually really good because I like the fact, though, that you could have a dev, a QA servers, and these aren't production, and then you have production. They're not charging you, at least for those developers and things like that, which is nice because I think years ago they would. You used to get charged for everything. Okay, so the images.
Yeah, but now with the open source community, they're starting to catch on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The thing that Microsoft's got hands down, though, of the open source, I've used Postgres and stuff. It's a great OLTP database, but I haven't seen a good open source database that does BI and all the other stuff. There's no reporting.
Try Mongo.
That's not a SQL, though. I would want something I can query with SQL.
Yeah, that's no SQL.
You know, that's a NoSQL. That's sharding. It's really a different purpose. That's more for like social media streaming. It's good. But if you want to really have something you can do like reporting and BI and analytics, and you get a SQL agent to run jobs, you know, that whole sort of BI stack, there isn't anything out there. Postgres is great. I had a client that used Postgres, but it really stunk because there was no ETL to it, for instance. So you have to go out and look for something to plug in for ETL. And
I'm sorry,
MySQL.
MySQL,
Nope.
and its offshoots, I think MariaDB.
But they're targeted more for that OLTP transaction platform. They're not. Microsoft's a little odd in that way. They're one of the only company I can really think of that's really going like data warehouse side crazy, and they've added all these features, and they've even included a lot of features that you would think of like JSON formatting in the database and the polybase to do all these advanced functions. So they do a lot of other stuff now in-memory tables, but the BI stack is something that they really address well, and even Oracle doesn't really do that without you paying a lot.
Yeah, and if you just need a relational engine, SQL will give you Express for free.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what really happens is in the enterprise, ultimately you want support and you want someone you can sue. So, I was at the Hartford and we looked at MySQL and, I forget the vendor, but there's no way we would have gone with just MySQL. We would have gone with a vendor for the whole, support stack.
There are companies that offer support around the open source software.
Right. So I'm saying and they don't do that for free. So what I'm getting at is as you get up to the enterprise and you have enterprise needs, SQL becomes that much more attractive because open source doesn't necessarily mean free when it's really something that the enterprise depends on. So.
A lot of good stuff these days, though.
Oh yeah, no, I love open source. I'm not even looking at it in terms of like open source versus non-open source. I'm just saying the real politique of it all comes down to, hey, look, these are my needs, and that's going to translate to cost at some point.
Yeah, I mean it all comes down to they took total cost, but if you get something and you end up adding a lot of other things or have longer support issues and stuff. If I were doing a straight OLTP system, I probably would just, you didn't hear this, but I'd probably go with like Postgres or something, just if it's not heavy volume and I could use something like Postgres will do pretty well because I was seeing this production site did great. But as soon as you get into the data warehouse side, they've just got such a wide range of tools. Even like 2016, the R server integration is phenomenal. And that alone used to cost like $15,000 or so just to get that R server. And now it's part of SQL Server. So their BI side is really good. And I don't know anybody that can really match that side of it. They just give you everything. I would like to see them put SSIS as a service in Azure. They've got Data Factory, but I think it's a challenge for some people. They want SSRS, they need SSIS, and you can't go to Azure as a service with that. So it kind of limits you. You've got to sort of chop off pieces or try to have a hybrid. You can't. There's no way to really migrate. So
I'm very biased, so I'd still go with SQL for the relational.
Yeah.
Because the HA, the high availability, and I love the whole.
Yeah.
I love the whole package.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because 2014 they have in-memory tables, so the features they put in are really interesting too. They started getting a lot of competition when you have a website and you get a lot of high volume. Sometimes you just don't have you can't take that time of committing to tables and stuff. So they just put it all in memory and swap in things out, and you can commit it back. That's a really nice feature that's typical of other types of databases. You don't normally see that in a relational database, that it's just there. And again, data warehousing, but they have something called column store index. So what they do is they pivot the index, and now it's column-based as opposed to row-based paging and stuff. Extremely efficient, extremely fast, and you can do tabular model, and cubes, but tabular model pushes everything into memory, and so it's a Tableau killer because between that and Power BI, now you can do everything.
It's just another way of massaging your data.
No, it's not. It's because what you're doing is you don't have to wait. You take 20 gig of data, squeeze it into memory, and now you're getting instant response for filter, sorting, grouping. And that's really a huge shift. It's really important to business because you don't want to sit there 20 days waiting for a query to come back. And that's not something you can get easily in other tools. Tableau had a similar thing, but Tableau is a very expensive tool. So yeah, it's like thousands of dollars per seat. So this, you buy it once and then you've got it.
You don't have to learn MDX either.
Yeah, you didn't learn DAX. Yeah, right, yeah. But no, it's a pretty cool thing. So that's why I'm wearing my Power BI shirt today. I was going to show you one other thing that's kind of cool. There's a module you can see. The install statement is here, but if I run this is a really cool tab. So I can go and look at runbooks and configurations, desired state configuration, assets, and all kinds of cool stuff. I'll do a quick look at Azure runbooks if you want. We'll just take a quick peek at that. But this allows me to have a nice little console that I can interact with Azure's runbooks and do all this stuff, and I can even push things up to Azure, and it will sync, and it will even, I believe it checks through your GitHub and things, and automatically you can use source control So this is kind of a nice bridge between the two environments. If you go into here, and I'll go into my all resources.
Is that panel specific to the ISE or?
Yes, I believe it is. That's you'd have to try it, but I'm pretty sure it's tied into. It's an add-in for the ISE.
What panel is that? What we're looking at here?
What I just pulled up.
I'm
This
sorry,
module.
that Azure modules panel you just had up.
Yeah. So
Oh, okay, sorry.
yeah. So I'm
So
pretty
that can
sure
add on.
it's kind of like the command show, but it's got this whole thing.
Ah.
So this would be kind of a selling point, I guess, for the ISE, but it's pretty cool. So that's actually I'm going to be focusing kind of at Ignite on this because I think it's a kind of an optimal way to.
Is that just ISE or did you buy that other thing, that ISE plus plus or whatever?
Nope, this is just Microsoft's ISE.
Oh, okay, all right.
And this is a standard module you can get to.
Oh,
right here,
okay.
Authoring toolkit. All right, so here for a minute. So if I want to go in here and look at runbook, this is really a tutorial, so let's go in and edit. So this would be an example of creating runbooks in Azure. And one of the things it can kind of do that's nice is you can create an asset, and one of them is like a connection. And so you can create a connection, and once it has it, you can pull it in and dynamically connect. So one of the things that's kind of a nice idea to do with Azure, if you can, is I like working externally, but it's nice if, at the end of the day to move it into Azure if you can, because then it's more self-contained. It seems to me that would be more secure than trying to connect externally and go between things and using credentials. But I would say, but you can develop a lot of it off-prem, get it working, and then push it up into a runbook. And the runbook supports pretty much everything you'd want to do anyway. The editor is not nearly as good as the ISE or VS Studio or whatever you want to use. So, but it's an okay editor. You can go in, it's got the colorization. And so here it's doing the connection. And this is behind the scenes. Basically, it's just the same thing as Service Principal, but here it's just using a thumbprint. And you have the try-catch block, which is standard PowerShell also. And it's just doing a listing of what kind of resource groups I have. So this is kind of typical runbook. So I can create credentials. I can have certificates. Nice thing, you can have variables for configuration. So I can say server name and whatever I want. I can make those variables in PowerShell. And they can be shared among runbooks. So if I have them all, a lot of them in the same resource group, I can just put the resource group in. And when I run a runbook, it will actually prompt me for parameters. So I don't have parameters defined at the top, but you can have a param statement, and it will say, okay, what do you want to enter for these parameters? So that kind of thing. And these can be scheduled and all kinds of good stuff. A nice little thing too is it'll give you you can go through the command list and say, oh yeah, I need that. And add to canvas,
cool.
It puts it in for you, and then you can tweak it to what you want. So kind of like a snippet for the things, but it is nice because you can just navigate to what you want. Okay, so this was the same thing. You've got the script, but this shows you how to do that searching for the different gallery pieces. We've looked at creating a service principal. Does every okay? So is everybody comfortable with creating modules? What that's about and stuff? And okay, all right. So we won't get into that. The other thing I will say is, if you create a reusable module and you intend to share it, you want to use a new module manifest and create a manifest 3D module. If you have any pieces you don't want to expose, you can use the export command at the end of the script, and that will only export what you want to be seen. So it's a good way to do some of those things. So within Azure, you can use runbooks. We looked a little at that. You can also use resource schedule, which was mentioned. So you can set the resource schedule to shut on and turn off resources. And you can have VM tools. So I like a tool that comes with SQL Server called SQL Agent, another big plug. Postgres has something that's not even half as good, but I've used it. But SQL Agent is amazing. So yeah, you're right. That would sell me on that as an OLTP as well. But you also can use task schedule. So all these tools are available within a VM. So if you want to, there's nothing says you can't automate. So if you have things in the VM, like running anything, database, statistics, whatever it is you want, a lot of automation can happen right on the machine. But when you're managing the external resources, you want to drop the VM and stuff, you might want to do other things. And we looked at Azure Runbook. It's just showing parameters, so it will prompt you for that when you go to run it. And it has, I didn't show you, but it gives you output history. You can go look at things and look at stuff. The non-PowerShell options, some of which we were talking about here, but Azure Cloud Shell, which is really kind of like a bash shell that you can interact, and there's some extra commands added so that you can navigate, move around things. For Azure, there's you can use the endpoints to start jobs and stuff called through HTTP. web jobs, similar type of thing. Web jobs that web service could call and start a PowerShell job and a runbook. Templates we talked about, so templates are good. And I got to look more at those because it sounds like they're pretty powerful. So to me, again, everything's good to have in your toolbox. So you want to figure out what makes sense where. But there's also things like backup schedule jobs. So a SQL Server has a backup schedule service, which is really nice. You don't have to do anything. You can go right in and just use a backup service for that. Scaling resources, obviously, you can set up your resources automatically on the schedule to say, give me 5 VMs, give me more memory at this time of day, shut it down here. That's actually built into Azure now. And for Docker stuff, you can use Kubernetes, which is its own, I think that's an open source way to do things. So who can tell me what the 2 portals are?
Classic and Resource Manager.
Right, good, all right. And how do the 2 relate to each other in terms of PowerShell? What's the difference in PowerShell terms?
Well, there's a new set of scripts that all have RM and then the
Yep.
There's 2 separate modules for them.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. I figure I'm gonna give. I have to give his book. I'll give you my book. Give away.
Okay.
But I figure. Somebody, I had to figure out who to give it to. You've been answering my questions.
I sit next to a bunch of DBAs.
Yeah. I haven't. If you want me to sign, I can do that too.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yep. All right. Actually, too, the physical book is expensive, but the ebook is only like you can find it for like $20. I think it's pretty cheap. Yeah, ebooks usually a lot cheaper. Okay, so what's a script module? I wasn't prepared for a test. Always get tested.
The script module is when you put a bunch of functions together.
Yeah.
In a file basically, and then you can load those functions as a root while
Yep.
you're treating like a module.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
I use them.
and it used to be like 2.0 and back. You could only write C# or whatever to do commandlets, and you couldn't do any modules or anything else. But now it's just a script. It's very much like Python. It's just a script file. Has a different extension, PSM1. What's an advanced function?
Commandlet binding.
Commandlet binding. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
African swallow.
Wait, how many people know this?